Hi, I'm Jean Shafiroff, and I'm on a mission. Anyone can be a philanthropist. My television show came from my book, Successful Philanthropy: How to Make a Life by What You Give. Won't you join me? Welcome to Successful Philanthropy. I'm your host, Jean Shafiroff. This show is designed to highlight the work of philanthropic leaders here in the United States and then beyond. Today with us, David Kilmnick. He is the co-founder, president, and CEO of LGBT Network. Let's all welcome David. And David, so great to have you with us. And David, talk a little bit about the LGBT Network and exactly what you do.
Sure. And first, thank you, Jean, for having us on here today to talk about the important work of the LGBT network, but for all that you do in making sure the work of our charities and our important nonprofits get out there. So thank you so much for all that you do. But let me just tell you a little bit about, I started this organization 28 years ago, back in 1993. And I'll tell you a little story. I was a student at Stony Brook University studying for my master's in social work. And it came down to our last semester where we had to choose to either do a master's thesis or a master's project. And so, I'll be honest, it was when you have a choice between a huge paper and a project, I said, okay, I've done enough papers, I'm going to do a project. And so the project was to create a curricula to go out into Long Island schools to talk about what it was like to grow up LGBT, particularly in the suburbs. So I created this curricula, got into a few schools. And when I say got into, sounds like it was a secretive mission and on the down low. And it pretty much was back in 1993. And no matter where I conducted this workshop, whether it was all the way on the western end of Long Island on the border of Nassau, Queens, or in the Hamptons or in between, there would always be a couple of kids at the end of the workshop that would shuffle their papers, they would hit them on the floor, and then they would say, they would wait for everyone else to leave to come up and ask the gay speaker a question. And the question was the same, whether it was in Uniondale, near Hofstra, or East Hampton. And the question simply from the kids was, is there any place I can go just to meet other people like myself? And back in 1993, there wasn't. And so I said, okay, this project needs to become something. So I started a non-for-profit called Long Island Gay and Lesbian Youth, or what we call Legally. And fast forward 28 years later, the organization has morphed into a network of nonprofits serving the LGBTQ community throughout the lifespan in Long Island and Queens. It includes the original organization Legally. It also includes Long Island Sage to serve our elders. It includes the Long Island LGBT Community Center to serve folks in between youth and elders, and specific trans programming. And we also started the Queens LGBT Center. So we have 4 community centers, and pretty much how we started in getting out into the community to create change and create safety still exists today, where we're in over 350 schools across Long Island and Queens doing stuff. So that's just, we do so much more, but I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about that.
So now you explained to me earlier that you're actually in Manhattan as well, and you go from Manhattan to Montauk. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we are, we say from the Midtown Tunnel to Montauk, because we literally are right past the Midtown Tunnel as you get into Queens. And so we have a community center that is located at Kaufman Studios in Astoria, but our work does go throughout the whole borough. And we have community centers in Hauppauge, which is our headquarters in Sag Harbor, the only community center, LGBT center on the East End, which is so important. And we could talk about how that started in terms of a suicide that happened. And then we are coming in July, this July, we're opening the 66-unit LGBT-friendly affordable senior housing project in downtown Bayshore, which was our original home, and a new community center there too. So, we make sure that we're located all across the island and in Queens so that we can give access to everyone. But a lot of our programs are also out in the community too.
Yes. Now, you mentioned that you're a network. So although you have your own centers, what do? You put together different groups in the LGBTQ space. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, so to serve Long Island, I mean, and Long Island, there's a reason why Long Island has that name because it's long, right? So it's 120 miles long, and so someone who's in Sag Harbor would have a very hard time getting to a community center in Bayshore, and you could go further west in Nassau, et cetera. So what we did was we came up with a different way to a different structure. To serve the LGBTQ community on Long Island. And so we created several nonprofits. One is Legally, one is the center, as I mentioned before, the Long Island Center and the Queen Center and Sage Long Island. The LGBT network serves as the administrative arm for all of those organizations. So we didn't have to hire 4 or 5 executive directors or CEOs, 4 or 5 development departments, so that more of the support that comes to the organization goes directly to supporting the community who our mission is to serve. And so it's one that makes financial sense and also programmatic sense because there's no fiefdom fights if we want to do an intergenerational program, say. Legally doesn't need to take credit for it. Long Island Sage doesn't need to take credit for it. You're not having that fighting. Instead, what's happening is the collaboration to make things happen and to make programs happen and to meet our mission in creating safer spaces where LGBT people live, learn, work, play, and pray.
I want to step back. Now, the LGBTQ community of Long Island, there are problems with other people accepting this community. And although I completely disagree with anyone who discriminates against somebody in this community, I want you to talk a little bit about the problems that exist today.
Sure. So, over the 28 years, some things have changed and some things haven't. I always say that fighting for equality, fighting for justice, and fighting for equity is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So, we got to keep running that marathon. Just because you win one piece of legislation, it doesn't mean your work is done. Our work will never be done in living in this country until everybody could be safe to be out, to just be themselves and do whatever they want to do with their lives and achieve whatever they want to achieve. So, this political climate that we're in certainly faces a challenge, for the LGBTQ community, our immigrant communities, for women, for people of color. Our strategy has been to try and get people to the table to talk with everyone. I think, we live in a culture right now where, people retreat to their own corners and there's no discussion. We need to have room for that dialogue to happen. And that's how we've been successful on Long Island. When I started the organization back in 1993, and not that this means anything, but that both counties had Republican county executives and Republican controlled legislatures. I didn't have an option to say, I'm not going to talk to you. Our kids needed that. Our kids needed a safe space. Suicide is so high amongst LGBT youth. So I managed to, figure out how to talk to people who may not think the same way that I think. And we were able to really educate folks and come to an agreement that no kid should feel alone. No kid should feel like they have to take their own lives because of who they love. And if we're able to have those discussions, I think we'll be able to move things forward. So we're still at that point right now, but I think we've done a really, really good job in bringing everyone to the table, not just those that are easy, if you will. And actually, no one's really easy with the LGBT community, but it's really about bringing everybody together because our LGBT kids, our LGBTQ community make up every single community, whether, all the areas of diversity, all geographic areas, all political persuasions, you name it. So, we are able to foster that dialogue that we don't see taking place pretty much across our country.
Which is very important. Now, let's talk about the children who are struggling with perhaps telling their parents that they feel most comfortable in the LGBTQ community. What advice do you give to those children who maybe are afraid to talk to their parents? They're afraid of rejection. What can you offer those children?
Sure, sure. Still today, I mean, as you said, Jean, there are kids who are afraid to come out, and because they fear that they're going to be rejected or sometimes, violence, physical violence as well. And so when we work with our kids, every situation is different, and we got to treat it as such. There aren't two home environments that are exactly the same. There aren't two school environments or community environments that are the same. So we work with everyone to get a real understanding of where they're at, and offer them support. And one of the key things through our organization is that our kids find support in one another as well, and they build up the strength and the resiliency to be able to come out to their parents. I mean, we also have a program that serves families and parents as well. And many times we will have parents that come to us before their kids come to us. And they want to know how they could support their kids, or they're coming because they have questions. And that's okay, because when kids come out to their parents, parents are coming out too. So we really work with the kids, coach with them, give them peer support. And what's really incredible is to see the resiliency and the leadership that they have. And many of them take that leadership and take it into their communities and schools as well.
And we've just come out of the COVID-19 pandemic, or we're coming out of the pandemic. And how did the pandemic affect your work? Did you move your programs online? And how could you serve your community during the pandemic?
Yeah, the pandemic was difficult for everyone, and in so many different ways. And for the not-for-profit sector, really hit all of us hard because we weren't able to fundraise as well to support a lot of the programs that our grants don't support. But first and foremost, we had to adjust really quickly to be able to serve our community. So we invested not only in technology like Zoom, but we found some other technology as well that we were able to offer about anywhere from 24 to 30 programs a week. We actually served more people during the pandemic because it gave greater access. One of the key things for the LGBT community is community, right? And a lot of times folks find that community through our programs or through our community centers. And so that was the key thing that we had to really figure out, is to how to serve a community that is isolated to begin with, largely isolated to begin with, and then is even more isolated because we had to quarantine and stay in our homes. And for kids that may have been in homes that weren't safe as well. And so we came up with a variety of programs, variety of services, a variety of means for kids to get involved. Our staff was amazing, and they still are. As we return to in-person now, we're not getting rid of the virtual programming. We're going to keep that as part of our future. I think, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the pandemic, not only in the delivery of our services, but also in self-care for our staff, because, I know, I could just speak for our organization. Our staff are so hardworking. They are so dedicated to the mission. We deal with some heavy issues. And so it's important, we learn to take care of one another as well.
Yes, and now for our audience, we are with David Kilmnick. He is the co-founder, the CEO, and president of LGBT Network. And David, getting back to the children, because we are a country where our youth is our future. And so for a child or a young person who is looking for help, how can they find your organization?
Sure. Thanks for asking that. So for anyone looking for help, for support, or if you want to get involved as a leader or volunteer in any way, in any capacity, you can reach us through our website at www.lgbtnetwork.org. You can call us at 631-665-2300, or email us at info@lgbtnetwork.org. Whichever way you reach, or through social media as well, on our Facebook page, Twitter, and YouTube. But no matter what you need or where you are in your life, we certainly will have something that could help support or help get you engaged a little bit more and active.
And I think the virtual programming and the Zoom programming is particularly important for children, especially if they feel very isolated and they're not anywhere near one of your centers, so to speak. And now getting back to you, David, and your ability to run this organization. I imagine it's a lot of work. I've heard that you receive government funding. Talk a little bit to our audience, because many of our people watching want to get involved. Maybe they want to donate, maybe they want to volunteer, maybe they need your services, but what your budget is like and where your funding comes from.
Sure, sure. So, we've grown exponentially over the last decade or so, really grew a lot. And our budget post-pandemic is about $5.5 million now. And about 80% of that comes from, a little bit more than 80% since the pandemic comes from government funding. And that's a percentage we need to change. We do need more support individually, and and hopefully folks can help us to go to lgbtnetwork.org, or certainly give a call. I could speak with anyone who calls. It doesn't matter. Any size donation really helps. But for all the work that we do, and we do get grants, those grants are very narrow in scope, and the work is wide that needs to be done, wide and far. Particularly for our young kids, because they live all over the place, and they're at so many different points in their lives. And for our families too, we can't forget about the parents. We have to make sure that we're helping the parents too. So that individual support, or that foundation support, really helps us to do a lot of things that government funding does not help us to do. And I think, there's a misnomer about government funding. I mean, government funding is great. I mean, we're allowed to, it allows us to certainly run some programs and services, and to put people to work and employ people in doing this important work. But government funding we have to expense for that. And a lot of times government funding, particularly New York State, takes an awful long time to pay you. So, for example, if we have a $150,000 grant, we could have fully spent that $150,000 and still waiting 18 months later to get that back. What kind of business could survive on that? And that's why the individual support is so important, because while we're waiting to get that government money back, it still allows us to operate and have that cash flow. And I think, with the pandemic, a lot of nonprofits, including ours, really had to be smart in the beginning to say, not only thinking about how we're going to survive in March 2020, but to look down the road in December 2020 and make those decisions in March 2020, knowing the trajectory of how funding works. So the individual support is so key. It allows us to do the important advocacy that needs to be done that's not covered under government funding. There's so much work that needs to be done in getting people together and addressing some of the homophobia and transphobia and biphobia that exists, and to help to build community. And so, we're so appreciative for everyone that supports us. It really makes a huge difference.
Yes, and I personally serve on about 7 charity boards, and a few of them do receive government funding, but the fundraising that the organization does and the private funding is key to the continuity of the work of those charities. And so for our viewers, any kind of donation given to a charity is vitally important. Now, David, what advice do you give to parents who might have a young child who is just discovering that they're part of the LGBTQ community, and the parent may not quite know what to do? What advice do you give?
Sure. I mean, the most important thing is that, is to make sure that they're there for support and love, right? But also to, that it's okay to have questions, right? It's okay to have questions, and we're here to help with that. And we're here to help connect parents with other parents so that they feel part of a community and can have that peer support too. But the most important thing is to love your kid, if you are able to offer that love and that support, they're going to thrive. They're not only going to survive, they're going to thrive. And I think that's really what every parent wants to see. Every parent wants to see their kid happy, right? And we know that love is not the problem in our world or in our country. And so if we're able to offer more of that, and show more of that, we'd have a much better world. And so with that, with the parents, is that, coming at when parents find out that their kid is LGBTQ, that they're going to go through a coming out process too. And it's okay. They're going to start thinking, what if I tell someone else in my family? Or what if I tell my friends? Or what if I tell people at work? And generally what they'll find, and I would say a large majority of the time, is that they're going to hear from other parents, oh, my kid is gay too, or I have a kid who's gay. And so they're going to find that support too. But, it's a coming out process for parents too.
I think the key is for parents to give their children love, support, and then to show acceptance and to embrace all of our differences. To me, it really makes no difference whether someone is A or B. We must embrace and love our children for who they are and what they are and accept them. And I love that you have programs both for children, for young adults, for middle-aged people, and then for seniors. And then I guess you have programs for the parents is what I'm hearing. And I think that's so important. And now, David, when you look back on this journey that you've been through, and I'm sure you've experienced um, um, just about everything, are there any particular incidents or situations that stand out in your mind and that you could relate to our audience and that perhaps we could all learn from?
There's so much that has happened over the years. And I think, even though I started this 28 years ago, and if I see one of those, if I run into, or one of those young people come back now, I still call them kids, and they're not kids. They're in their 40s, which is frightening. How long I've been doing this, but to see them come back and still have that, those friends that they made, that extended family, or their family, that may be their family, that they made back in the early to mid 1990s, and that they are doing what they wanted to do with their life. They are working in whatever profession they wanted to work in, that they are happy, that they are successful, that they were able to get through life's journeys because they had that support, and that family that they built. That to me is the most rewarding thing. When I see the smiles on the kids' faces, or when they come back, or when I get an email or a call from them, on their excitement of pursuing their education, or pursuing their careers, or starting a family themselves, becoming parents. And so, just to watch that journey, and knowing where they came from, and the struggles that they may have had, and how they were just so strong and resilient to get through that and overcome, is really the most special thing, and why I still love doing this work, because it makes a huge difference. It makes an impact in so many people's lives.
It sounds as if you've created great community. And if people come back to your organization after years and years, well, it sounds like you're really doing something right. Now, what about volunteer opportunities? For example, I might be in a situation where I'm a teacher, but I'd like to help with children after school. Do you have tutoring opportunities available for volunteers, and what are the volunteer opportunities?
Sure, sure. Volunteers are so important, have been critical in our 28-year history, particularly when I started in the beginning. And I started as a volunteer for the first 2 years, actually, and ran the organization as a volunteer. But, so volunteers are key in so many different ways, whether it's helping out at our community centers, either operating the front desk, if you will, and welcoming people, to having folks there as we return to in-person programming for our Friday night youth programs, to helping with different mailings, to helping with Long Island Pride, which we run. There's so many different avenues that folks can help, to getting involved on fundraising committees too. And so there's whether it's services, or whether it's the external community stuff that we do, or the fundraising, there's really opportunities at every different level for people to get involved.
And I assume you vet your volunteers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think, there's one of the things in working in this sector or industry for 28 years is sometimes people say, oh, have volunteers, it's free. There's no such thing as free, right? Because volunteers need to be trained. You have to make sure that you provide the proper training to them, the policies and the operational procedures, supervision, and all along the way. So having volunteers is a program in and of itself. And part of that program needs to be having, policies, training, and supervision. Two
Yes,
minutes.
and volunteers are vitally important to most charities. And of course, if you're thinking of volunteering, remember you are giving your time and your knowledge, and you must go in and treat everyone with dignity and respect. And then in turn, you should be treated with dignity and respect. And for our viewers, if you want to donate, remember that any donation is of value. Never think that your donation of maybe 25, 50, 75, or $100 is meaningless, because it's not. Those donations collectively really add up, and you become part of a system of giving back and helping an organization such as the LGBT network. And again, David, could you give the website for the donations? And then if people want to volunteer or if they want to utilize your services, please give the information again.
Sure. To either donate or volunteer, you go to lgbtnetwork.org, or call 631-665-2300 or email info@lgbtnetwork. Like you said, Gene, any amount is helpful, and every single, a lot of people want to give back too. And so we have the opportunities for you to give back and get involved and get engaged as well.
Which is all wonderful. And David, as we end this interview, are there a few final words you want to leave our audience with?
First of all, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you to you again, for not only having us, but for really, bringing the important work of not-for-profits and charities to the forefront. And that our organization is here for everyone. It's not just the LGBTQ community, because it's everyone that makes up LGBTQ people's lives. And that's everyone here who's watching this show. And so, whether it's your workplace, whether it's your family, whether it's your community or your school, we're here for you. And please reach out, and we will be there for you.
David, I want to thank you for the wonderful work you do. The work is very important. This concludes Successful Philanthropy. Today's guest, David Kilmnick. He's the CEO, the president, and co-founder of LGBT Network. I'm Jean Shafiroff, your host. I'll see you next week.